The iron bars rattled as the rock struck them, the sharp clang slicing through the dusty afternoon air. Eleanor Whitaker did not flinch. She stood inside the cage at the center of Silver Hollow's main square, her back straight, her hands clenched at her sides while a knot of townspeople pressed closer. A boy laughed too loudly. A man spat into the dirt. Somewhere near the edge of the crowd, a woman screamed for everyone to step back as another stone flew. Eleanor felt the danger before it fully arrived, the way cruelty could tip into something worse, something final. One wrong spark, one shouted word, and this crowd would stop being spectators and become a mob. She lifted her chin, her gray eyes empty and unblinking, as if daring fate itself to make its move. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Silver Hollow had once been nothing more than a rough camp for miners chasing veins of silver in the Montana hills. Over the years, it hardened into a town that believed survival excused almost anything. Its buildings leaned inward, as if listening to secrets. The saloon doors never stopped swinging, and at the heart of it all, planted like a warning sign, stood the iron cage. Eleanor Whitaker had been inside that cage for 17 months. The sheriff called it justice. The town council called it mercy. The people called it entertainment. They called Eleanor other names too. Giant widow, murderess, monster. She heard them all, even when she pretended not to. Sound carried strangely inside the cage, echoing off iron and wood, sinking deep into places she had learned not to feel. Eleanor was taller than most men in Silver Hollow, broad-shouldered from years of hard labor beside her late husband. Strength had once been her pride. Here, it was her crime. Sheriff Vernon Pike sat at a small table beside the cage, his chair tipped back, boots crossed, a ledger open in front of him. Coins glinted in neat stacks near his elbow. $1 to look, $10 to touch the bars. The sign was painted in thick black letters for anyone who could read. Pike liked order. He liked the sound of money hitting wood even more. From where she stood, Eleanor could see the faces in the crowd. Miners with dust still clinging to their clothes, women clutching shawls tight around their throats, children perched on crates for a better view. Some were curious. Some were afraid. Too many were eager. None of them saw her as a woman anymore. They saw a story they had been told too many times to question. Eleanor's thoughts drifted, as they often did, to the night everything broke. The alley behind the boarding house. The sour smell of liquor. Hands grabbing, voices mocking her height. Her grief, her loneliness. She remembered fighting back, remembered the shock on their faces when she refused to be small. The rest was blood and shouting and the sound of boots running toward her. 3 men had died. She had lived. Silver Hollow decided that was unforgivable. A voice rose above the crowd now, sharp with anger. Thomas Hale, the blacksmith, shoved his way closer to the cage, his soot-stained apron flapping against his legs. His brother had been one of the men who never walked out of that alley. Hale's grief burned hot and loud, and the town fed it willingly. "She should have swung from a rope," he shouted. "Sheriff, you're going soft, keeping her breathing." A murmur of agreement rippled through the square. Sheriff Pike didn't look up from his ledger. "Town council made its choice," he said lazily. "She stays, and she pays her debt." Eleanor wondered, not for the first time, how much of that debt was real and how much jingled in Pike's pockets. Near the edge of the square, Abigail Moore stood stiffly, her gloved hands folded tight. She was the school teacher, a widow herself, and one of the few people in Silver Hollow who would meet Eleanor's gaze without flinching. Abigail had spoken once, early on, suggesting a proper trial, a chance for truth. The town had answered with silence and cold looks. She had learned how far one voice could go in a place like this. Now she watched the crowd swell, her chest tight with a fear she could not quite name. Eleanor felt it too. The air had changed. The laughter sounded thinner, meaner. She could sense how quickly the mood might tip, how easily someone might decide the cage wasn't enough today. She fixed her eyes on a patch of dirt near her boots and breathed slowly, the way she had taught herself to do in the dark hours before dawn. Showing fear only invited more of it. That was when a stranger rode into Silver Hollow. The horse appeared first at the far end of the street, head low, gait steady. Then the rider came into view, a tall man with dust on his coat and weariness etched deep into his face. His hat brim shadowed gray eyes that had seen too much and learned to expect little. He reined in when he saw the crowd, curiosity slowing him, then something else tightening his posture. Caleb Rhodes had planned to buy supplies and leave before nightfall. Silver Hollow was just another stop on a long road that never seemed to end. He had been moving for 2 years, ever since fever took his wife and unborn child in a single, merciless night. Standing still hurt too much. Motion was easier. He nudged his horse closer, drawn by the noise, by the unnatural shape of iron in the middle of town. When he finally saw the cage, his jaw set hard. Inside stood a woman who looked carved from stone. Caleb noticed her stillness before he noticed the sign, before he took in the sheriff's table or the stacks of coins. She did not beg. She did not rage. She simply existed, tall and unbroken, in a place designed to grind her down. Their eyes met. In that brief connection, something shifted. Caleb recognized the emptiness there, not weakness, but the hollow quiet of someone who had lost everything and learned that feeling nothing was safer than feeling too much. He had seen that look in the mirror more times than he cared to count. The crowd surged again, laughter rising as another hand reached for the bars. Caleb's fingers tightened on the reins. He felt anger spark, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the numbness he had lived with for so long. He did not yet know Eleanor's name. He did not know her story. But he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that whatever Silver Hollow claimed she was, the truth was far more complicated. And he knew he would not be able to ride away without answering that knowledge. As the sheriff finally looked up and noticed the stranger, as Abigail caught sight of the dust-covered rider near the front of the crowd, the invisible threads of their lives drew a little closer together. Silver Hollow had no idea that its carefully maintained cruelty was about to be challenged, and Eleanor Whitaker, standing in her cage, felt something she had not felt in a long time, a flicker of attention that was not fueled by hate. She did not know yet whether it meant danger or salvation, only that something was about to change. Caleb remained near the edge of the square, while the crowd shifted and muttered. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements measured, the way he had learned to do in rough towns where attention could turn dangerous. The horse flicked an ear, uneasy, sensing the tension in the air. Caleb looped the reins over a post and stepped forward, boots scraping dust. He felt eyes on him, weighing him, deciding whether he belonged. Sheriff Pike closed his ledger with a soft thud and straightened. His smile was thin and practiced. He asked if Caleb planned to pay or pass through. Caleb answered that he was only looking. Pike chuckled and gestured at the cage as if presenting a prize. The words justice and mercy drifted easily from his mouth, polished by repetition. Caleb listened, silent, studying the way Pike's hand hovered near the coin stacks. Eleanor watched the stranger from behind her lashes. She had learned to measure men quickly. This one carried himself like someone who had been knocked down and stood up anyway. The crowd pressed closer, encouraged by Pike's show. A miner reached for the bars. Eleanor felt the old tightening in her chest and forced herself to breathe. She focused on the stranger's hands, noticing how they stilled when the miner laughed. Caleb asked what crime merited a cage. The question landed wrong. The square quieted, surprised. Pike's eyes narrowed, then smoothed. He recited the story as the town preferred it told. 3 men dead. A woman too strong. Fear masquerading as order. Caleb heard the gaps between the sentences. He heard what was not said. A voice cut in from the side. Thomas Hale shoved forward, his face red, his grief sharp. He named the dead and demanded blood. The crowd answered him, a low roar that pushed against Caleb's ribs. Eleanor lifted her head. Her voice did not rise. She said the word no once, firm as a door closed. The sound sliced through the noise and left a ringing hush. Caleb felt the hush settle like dust. He glanced back and saw Abigail Moore standing rigid near the steps of the schoolhouse. Her eyes flicked from Eleanor to Pike, then to Caleb, a warning and a plea tangled together. Caleb nodded once, almost without thinking. He had learned to read faces during long nights on the trail. The sheriff cleared his throat and announced the price again. Coins clinked. The miner withdrew his hand. The crowd loosened, disappointed. Pike asked Caleb if he would care to contribute. Caleb said he would. He did not move toward the table. Instead, he asked how long the woman had been kept there. Pike answered with dates that slid past the truth. Eleanor counted the months in her head, each one heavy. As the afternoon dragged, Caleb stayed. He watched the pattern of cruelty repeat, small and relentless. He noticed how Eleanor stood when a child cried, how she turned slightly away from the men who jeered, offering her shoulder instead of her face. He noticed the scars on her knuckles, the calm discipline of someone who had learned to endure without surrendering. Memory rose uninvited. A narrow room, the smell of vinegar and sickness, his wife's hand cooling in his, the doctor's helpless eyes, the silence afterward that felt louder than any crowd. Caleb pressed his tongue to the back of his teeth until the memory loosened. He had ridden to escape that silence. Here it found him anyway. When the sun dipped, Pike announced a break. The crowd thinned, drifting toward the saloon. Eleanor sank onto the bench inside the cage, knees trembling now that she could no longer be seen as strong. Caleb approached the bars. He did not reach for them. He spoke her name softly after asking it. She hesitated, then told him. The sound of it felt strange and fragile. He asked if anyone had defended her. She looked past him at the hills and said no. She said she had stopped expecting it. The truth settled between them, heavy but clean. Caleb told her his name and nothing else. It was enough for the moment. Abigail returned with a tin cup of water, setting it near the cage. Pike scowled but said nothing. The teacher met Caleb's gaze and murmured that the truth was buried with the dead men's friends. She warned him to be careful. Caleb thanked her and watched Pike's back as he walked away. Night crept in, lanterns flared. The cage cast long shadows across the square, bars stretching like fingers. Eleanor lay back and stared at the stars, counting breaths. Caleb stood nearby, listening to the town settle into its habits. He felt a decision forming, not yet shaped, but insistent. By the time Pike returned, counting coins, Caleb knew he would not leave in the morning. Whatever came next would begin here, under a sky that watched without judgment, in a town that had forgotten how. He stayed until the lanterns burned low and the square emptied to echoes. Pike locked the cage with a careless clank and warned Eleanor to keep quiet through the night. Caleb watched the key turn, memorizing the motion. He imagined the weight of metal, the sound it made in dreams. Abigail lingered, then slipped away, leaving a folded paper by Caleb's saddle with a single address and a promise. Eleanor lay still, listening to boots fade. She wondered why the stranger remained when others fled. Caleb wondered how a town learned to confuse order with fear. Above them, clouds slid across the stars, hiding and revealing, as if testing patience. By dawn, he told himself, he would know what to do. By dawn, Silver Hollow would still be the same. He suspected he would not. The night held its breath, and somewhere beyond the hills, a choice gathered strength, waiting for a man to decide whether mercy was worth the cost, before the town woke and demanded blood again. Morning arrived in Silver Hollow with the sound of boots on boardwalks and the smell of coal smoke drifting low over the street. The town woke as it always did, grinding itself back into motion without reflection. Sheriff Pike unlocked the cage at dawn only long enough to shove a tin plate of food inside, then snapped it shut again, the metal ring echoing through the square. Eleanor Whitaker sat up slowly, her body stiff from the night, her mind already bracing for another day of being watched. Caleb Rhodes had not slept. He stood near his horse with a cup of bitter coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the cage as townspeople began to gather. Miners returned from early shifts. Women paused on their errands. Children lingered where they had been told not to. The square filled the way a wound fills with flies. Sheriff Pike clapped his hands together and called for attention. He announced that the council had reviewed the situation again and found no reason to change it. The town had been generous, he said. They had spared a rope. They had allowed the woman to live. The words were met with nods and murmurs of approval. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. He stepped forward before he fully realized he meant to. Pike noticed him and smiled, already sensing the shape of profit. He asked if the traveler had returned to contribute. Caleb answered that he had. He asked how much the town had decided Eleanor's life was worth today. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Pike spread his hands and repeated the prices, savoring them. Caleb shook his head once and said he did not mean for an hour or a day. He meant altogether. He asked what it would cost to end the sentence. The square stilled. Even the children quieted, sensing something different in the air. Thomas Hale surged forward, face twisted. He shouted that there was no price for justice, that blood demanded blood. He named his brother again, loud enough to drown out reason. The crowd leaned toward him, anger warming like a fire. Eleanor rose to her feet. She did not raise her voice. She told the truth as she remembered it, plain and unembellished. She spoke of the alley, the hands, the words spoken into her ear about what a widow owed the world. She spoke of fighting because she had no other choice. When she finished, she stood tall, accepting whatever came next. The truth unsettled the square. Some faces turned away. Others hardened. Sheriff Pike cleared his throat sharply and declared it irrelevant. The council had ruled. Order must be kept. Caleb reached into his coat and drew out a leather pouch. He loosened the tie and let the gold spill onto the sheriff's table. The sound cut through the murmurs, bright and undeniable. Pike's eyes flicked down, then up again, calculating. He named a price meant to end the conversation. Caleb did not argue. He counted the coins slowly, deliberately, until the pile matched the number Pike had spoken. The town watched in stunned silence as the sheriff gathered the gold, his fingers trembling despite himself. He declared the matter settled before anyone could think too hard about it. Eleanor felt the world tilt. She stared at the empty space on the table, at the man who had just spent everything for her. Fear rose sharp and sudden. Freedom could be another kind of danger. Caleb stepped closer to the cage. He did not touch the bars. He looked at Eleanor and asked her to listen. He said he believed no human being should be kept like an animal. He said he recognized the look in her eyes because he carried it himself. He told her he was leaving town and offered her a choice. Before the sheriff could interrupt, Caleb reached into his vest and produced a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. He dropped to one knee in the dust, right there before Silver Hollow, and asked Eleanor Whitaker to marry him. The square erupted. Shouts clashed, laughter and outrage tangling together. Eleanor felt her breath catch painfully. The word "why" escaped her before she could stop it. Caleb answered without raising his voice. He said he did not expect gratitude or obedience. He said he wanted a partner who understood what it meant to lose everything and keep standing. He said two broken people might stand a better chance together than alone. Sheriff Pike fumbled for his keys, eager to finish the transaction and move on. Thomas Hale cursed and shoved, but the crowd had lost its shape. The lock clicked open. The sound rang through Eleanor like a bell. She stepped out of the cage on unsteady legs. Caleb stood and offered his hand, steady and open. After a long moment, she took it. The touch grounded her, warm and real. They did not linger. Abigail Moore pressed through the thinning crowd and whispered that they must leave before fear found its courage again. Caleb lifted Eleanor onto his horse with care and swung up in front of her. She wrapped her arms around his waist, her grip tight, her heart hammering. They rode out of Silver Hollow under a sky already turning pale, the iron cage shrinking behind them. Shouts followed, but no one stopped them. The town watched its monster disappear and did not know whether to feel relief or shame. As the road opened ahead, Eleanor rested her forehead against Caleb's back, overwhelmed by the sudden weight of choice. Caleb guided the horse toward the hills, knowing the hardest part was still to come. Freedom was fragile. Trust would not come easily. Somewhere ahead, a small town waited, and with it a decision that would bind them together in a way neither had planned, but both now needed more than they could admit. They rode hard until Silver Hollow disappeared behind a fold of land, and the sound of the town faded into nothing but wind. Only then did Caleb ease the horse into a steadier pace. Eleanor's arms were still locked around his middle, her grip tight enough that he could feel the tremor running through her. He did not tell her to loosen it. He understood the need to hold on when the ground beneath you had just shifted. The road narrowed into a dirt track bordered by scrub grass and low, stubborn pines. Morning light spread thin and pale across the hills, washing the world clean of the square, the cage, the faces that had pressed in too close. Eleanor forced herself to breathe with the rhythm of the horse. Each breath felt like a test. She half expected to hear shouts again, to feel a hand grab her arm and drag her back. But nothing came. After a long while, she loosened her hold just enough to sit back. Her voice, when she spoke, sounded rough, as if it had been unused for too long. She asked where they were going. Caleb told her there was a small town called Alder Creek, 2 hours ahead. Quiet, with a preacher who asked few questions and kept his word. He added that if she changed her mind at any point, he would take her wherever she wanted and give her what money he had left. The offer was simple, without pride or pressure. Eleanor studied the back of his coat, the way the seams had been repaired more than once. She told him she did not understand why he had done it. She said she was dangerous to be near, that trouble followed her like a shadow. The words came out sharp, rehearsed, the names the town had taught her to use for herself. Caleb listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said he had buried a wife and a child in the same week and had not felt like a whole man since. He said the cage in Silver Hollow had looked too much like the place he kept his own grief locked up. Leaving her there would have meant admitting that cruelty was easier than courage. He said he was tired of choosing the easier thing. They rode on in silence after that. Eleanor let his words settle. She had heard speeches before, promises made loud and broken just as loudly. This was different. There was no performance in him, no attempt to convince. He spoke as if stating weather. Alder Creek appeared as a handful of buildings gathered around a narrow stream. Smoke rose from chimneys. A bell hung outside a small white church, its rope frayed with use. Caleb dismounted first and helped Eleanor down. Her legs wobbled, unused to freedom. She steadied herself and felt the strange, frightening openness of standing without iron behind her. Inside the church, the air smelled of old wood and candle wax. The preacher was a gray-haired man with tired eyes who looked at them both for a long moment before nodding. He asked their names, nothing more. His wife served as witness, her gaze gentle and curious, not fearful. The vows were spoken plainly. Eleanor's hands shook when she placed them in Caleb's, but his grip was warm and sure. When the preacher asked if she would take this man, Eleanor hesitated just long enough to feel the weight of the choice, then said yes. The word surprised her with its steadiness. Afterward, they stood outside under a sky turning gold. Caleb asked again if she was certain. Eleanor answered that she was certain of only one thing, that she did not want to go back. For now, that was enough. They took a small room above the general store for the night. Eleanor stood by the window, watching the street below, waiting for someone to shout her name. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed and told her there was no rush, that whatever they were building would take time. No one had ever offered her time before. She nodded, unsure what to do with it. They left Alder Creek at first light. The land opened as they traveled north, rolling and wide, the sky vast enough to make a person feel small in a way that was not cruel. Caleb told her about his grandfather's old place, a neglected ranch near the Montana line, where fences sagged and fields waited for hands willing to work. He said it was quiet there. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to imagine a place without shouting. 2 days into the journey, they sensed they were no longer alone. Caleb noticed the sign first, hoof prints that matched theirs too closely, too consistently. He said nothing, only adjusted his pace and watched the land. Eleanor felt the change in him, the way his shoulders tightened. Memory rose hot and immediate. She knew what it was to be followed. At dusk, they stopped near a stand of trees. Caleb checked the ground and confirmed what he already suspected. Someone was trailing them, keeping distance. Eleanor asked who it might be. Caleb said he could not be sure, but towns like Silver Hollow did not always let go easily. That night, sleep came in fragments. Eleanor dreamed of iron and woke with her heart racing. Caleb sat awake, rifle across his knees, listening. Near dawn, a shape moved at the edge of the firelight. Eleanor reached for Caleb's arm before fear could freeze her. A man stepped forward slowly, hands visible. Thomas Hale's face was drawn, his anger sharpened into something colder. He said he had come for answers, not blood. Eleanor rose to her feet, taller than him, her voice calm. She told him the truth again, without apology or challenge. She told him what his brother had done. Thomas listened. Doubt crept into his expression, unwelcome and heavy. He said nothing more, only turned away and vanished into the trees. When the light returned, Eleanor felt something ease in her chest. The danger had not vanished, but it had changed shape. Caleb packed up the camp and said they should keep moving. The ranch was close now. As they rode on, Eleanor realized that the cage had not only held her body, it had taught her to expect harm. Each mile put distance between her and that lesson, but unlearning it would take longer. Ahead waited work and silence, and the slow test of living beside another person. She did not know yet whether love would grow there, only that for the first time since the alley, the path forward was not defined by fear alone. The ranch sat in a shallow valley where the land softened, as if the hills had finally exhaled. Weathered buildings leaned into the wind, gray wood scarred by years of neglect. A narrow creek cut through the grass, its water clear and cold, whispering over stones. Eleanor took it in from the saddle, her breath catching. There were no bars, no signs, no eyes waiting to judge. Just space. Caleb dismounted and helped her down. Her boots sank slightly into the earth, and the simple sensation grounded her more than she expected. He told her they would need to work hard to make the place livable again. She nodded, already scanning the fences, the roofline, the sagging corral. Work, at least, was something she understood. The first days passed in quiet effort. They spoke little, falling into a rhythm shaped by necessity. Caleb repaired broken boards and reset posts. Eleanor hauled feed sacks, cleared brush, and mended what could be mended. Her strength, once mocked, became useful again. The land did not care how tall she was, or how wide her shoulders stretched a shirt. It answered only to labor. At night, they shared simple meals and sat on the porch, watching the sky change colors. Silence settled between them, not awkward but cautious. Eleanor slept lightly, waking at every unfamiliar sound. Sometimes she heard iron clanging in her dreams and woke with her hands clenched tight. Caleb noticed and spoke softly, reminding her where she was. His voice anchored her until the panic ebbed. The closeness tested them in quieter ways. Eleanor flinched when Caleb moved too suddenly. Caleb, unused to sharing space, sometimes withdrew into himself without warning. Small misunderstandings sparked brief tension. Each time they stepped back rather than forward, learning each other's boundaries by respecting them. One afternoon, as Eleanor stacked firewood, she felt eyes on her. The sensation slid cold down her spine. She straightened slowly and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, but the feeling lingered. She mentioned it to Caleb that evening. He listened, his expression tightening. He checked the perimeter again, confirming what he had already suspected. Thomas Hale had not truly gone. The next night, Thomas appeared at the edge of the clearing, his figure half hidden by shadow. He did not shout or threaten. He stood and waited. Eleanor felt the old instinct surge, the urge to brace herself for violence. Instead, she stepped forward, meeting him where he stood. Thomas said he could not sleep with questions unanswered. He admitted he had spoken to the doctor in Silver Hollow, heard things that did not fit the story he had clung to. His voice cracked when he said his brother had not been the man he wanted to believe. The words tasted bitter. Eleanor did not soften her truth to spare him. She told him again what had happened, every detail steady and clear. She did not justify herself or ask forgiveness. She simply refused to carry his lies any longer. Caleb stood a few steps behind her, present but silent, letting her lead. Thomas listened until his shoulders sagged. The anger drained from him, leaving only grief. He said he would leave and not return. He did not ask for mercy. He turned and walked away, smaller than Eleanor remembered. After he vanished into the dark, Eleanor's knees weakened. Caleb caught her before she fell. She pressed her face against his chest, shaking, the weight of confrontation finally released. He held her without speaking, his arms firm and patient. The days that followed felt lighter. Not easy, but possible. Eleanor began to believe the land might accept her fully. She planted a small garden near the creek. Caleb fixed the roof before winter could claim it. They worked side by side, their movements slowly aligning. One morning, Eleanor suggested marking the hill behind the house. Caleb understood without asking. Together they carved simple wooden markers. Eleanor etched her husband's name, her hands steady. Caleb carved his wife's, then added a smaller mark beneath for the child he never met. They stood there as the wind moved through the grass, grief shared and honored, no longer locked away. A letter arrived weeks later, carried by a passing rider. Abigail Moore's careful handwriting told them the cage in Silver Hollow had been dismantled. The square looked strange without it, she wrote, emptier but quieter. Eleanor read the letter twice, then folded it and set it aside. She felt no urge to return. The place had lost its hold on her. As autumn crept in, the ranch began to feel like a home. They laughed once, surprised by the sound. It came easily after that, small and unguarded. Trust did not arrive all at once. It grew slowly, rooted in shared mornings and unspoken understanding. Still, Eleanor knew the past had not vanished. Scars remained, invisible but real. Some nights she woke, breath sharp, expecting iron. Each time she reached for Caleb, and he was there. Each time the fear loosened its grip a little more. Winter would test them, she knew. So would time. But standing on the porch at dusk, watching the land settle into shadow, Eleanor felt something unfamiliar and fragile take shape inside her. Not certainty, not peace, hope. And she held it carefully, knowing it was worth protecting, knowing the next season would ask everything of it. Winter came early to the valley, settling over the ranch with a quiet firmness that left no room for doubt. Snow dusted the hills and crept down into the low places, softening the land Eleanor had come to know by touch and effort. The creek slowed, its song muted beneath thin ice. Each morning, Eleanor stepped outside and breathed in the cold, letting it fill her lungs, grounding her in the certainty that this life, hard, plain, and honest, was real. Caleb rose before dawn, as he always had. He split wood, checked the animals, and made coffee strong enough to cut through the chill. Eleanor joined him soon after, wrapped in a heavy coat he had altered to fit her broad shoulders. They moved together now without thinking, passing tools, anticipating needs. The small, careful distance that had once defined their days had eased into something steadier. Winter tested them. Storms rolled down from the north, pressing snow against the house until the world shrank to white and wind. Supplies ran low once, and Caleb had to ride out alone to the nearest town. Eleanor watched him go with a tightness she did not hide. He returned 2 days later, cold and smiling, and she realized how deeply his presence had settled into her sense of safety. On one of the longest nights, Eleanor woke with her heart pounding, the sound of iron ringing sharp in her ears. She sat up, shaking, certain she had heard the cage door slam shut again. Caleb stirred and reached for her, his hand warm and solid. He spoke her name softly, reminding her where she was, what surrounded them. She leaned into him, tears slipping free, and did not apologize. He did not ask her to. As winter loosened its grip, the land began to breathe again. Snow melted into the creek. Grass pushed stubbornly through the thawing earth. Eleanor felt something inside her shift with the season. The fear that had once shaped her every thought no longer ruled her days. It still whispered, but it no longer commanded. In early spring, a rider appeared on the far ridge. Eleanor's body tensed before her mind caught up. Caleb saw it too and set down his tools, watching calmly. When the rider drew closer, they recognized Abigail Moore. She dismounted stiffly, smiling with relief when she saw Eleanor step forward unafraid. They welcomed her inside, offered food and warmth. Abigail told them Silver Hollow had changed in small but important ways. The cage was gone. Sheriff Pike had been forced out after questions were asked too loudly to ignore. The town had not become kind, but it had grown quieter, more cautious of its own shadows. Abigail studied Eleanor closely and said she looked different. Not smaller, not softer, but settled. Eleanor thanked her for speaking when no one else would. Abigail shook her head and said Eleanor had done the harder thing. She had lived. After Abigail left, Eleanor stood outside for a long time, watching the horizon. She felt no pull toward the town that had defined her suffering. The past no longer demanded her return. That evening, Caleb asked if she regretted the choice she had made. Eleanor considered the question carefully. She thought of the cage, the crowd, the way the world had narrowed around her until survival meant silence. She thought of the ranch, the work, the quiet nights when fear loosened its grip just enough to let rest in. She told him she did not regret choosing life again, even when it scared her. Summer brought warmth and growth. The garden Eleanor planted flourished. They repaired fences and expanded the corral. Sometimes they argued over small things, tired things. But the arguments ended without cruelty or silence. They learned to speak plainly, to listen without bracing for harm. One afternoon, Caleb came back from the fields carrying a small wooden box. Inside was a ring he had carved himself, simple and smooth. He told Eleanor he knew they had married in urgency, bound by escape and necessity. He asked if she would choose him again, this time without a crowd, without fear driving the moment. Eleanor felt the weight of the question settle deep and steady. She said yes without hesitation. They stood together on the hill behind the house, where the markers for their lost loved ones caught the light. Eleanor placed the ring on her finger, its fit imperfect but true. She rested her head against Caleb's shoulder, feeling the wind move through the grass, carrying no voices from the past. As the years passed, the ranch became known not for legend or fear, but for quiet steadiness. Travelers spoke of a tall woman and a quiet man who worked hard and kept to themselves. They spoke of hospitality offered without judgment, of a place where people were allowed to be as they were. Eleanor aged into her strength. It softened at the edges but never faded. Caleb's hair grayed, his movements slowed, but his presence remained sure. They built a life measured not by grand moments, but by accumulated trust. On cool evenings, they sat on the porch, hands resting together, watching the sun sink behind the hills. Eleanor sometimes spoke of the cage, not with bitterness, but as something that had once been true and no longer was. Caleb listened, always. She had learned that freedom was not the absence of memory, but the power to live fully alongside it. The past had shaped her, but it did not own her. As night settled over the valley, Eleanor closed her eyes and breathed in the familiar scents of earth and wood smoke. She felt Caleb beside her, solid and patient. The world stretched wide and open, no bars in sight. She had been caged once, she had been broken. Now she was home. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.